And we are live, back with another episode of the Friendly Cannabis Show. Very stoked today for this guest. I know a lot of you had reached out to me in the meantime and expressed the same thing. We've got JJ of Dawg Seeds. So thank you for joining us.
Hey now, what's up? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. You know, there's so many different directions I could go, and I do actually have notes here because this is going to be fun. But one thing, that we could definitely say about you is that you have a solid reputation that has passed the test of time. And when it comes to like breeders and seed companies these days, that sort of track record is really important. And that's something that a lot of people look to. I know a lot of, I almost want to say like a breeder's breeder. You're known for some pretty good crosses, very powerful cannabis, which we'll get into as well. We share the same love for a particular strain. And you've got, dozens of reputable strains out there yourself. So I kind of want to start it off. We could start anywhere. Chat, definitely toss your questions in. We'll get to them at this point. But I kind of wanted to start it back, way back. I was listening to an interview the other day, and early in the East Coast, you scored weed from a janitor at your school. Is that right? Is that how you kind of first came across cannabis or getting that on the regular?
Well, no, I really experienced it really before that, but that was like kind of during my some of my high school experiences. Going further back, a friend of mine was working as a janitor after school for janitor service, and he was working with a guy, and this guy used to get this was the first kind bud I ever saw, and it was like this green sesame, and there was no name to it back then, right. So we used to call it like Christmas tree or pine tree. And we used to get that on a regular basis, and that was that and some of the Hawaiian bud that used to come around back in the day was also seedless sesame, and so that was really my first experience with kind bud. But going through the I was still in high school at that time. My friend was a little bit older than me. He was a year older, so I was a junior. He was a senior, and so but when he left school, it was around that same time that I was dealing with the janitor from the school, and really back then it was like good weed was where you found it, meaning like one guy would have it for he would get like a shipment of it, and once it was gone, it was gone. He would have to go and try to track it down somewhere else. There was, but there wasn't like steady connections. Like you could get steady connections for pretty like mid-grade weed, but if you wanted the really good kind bud, that was really hard to find, and people would only get that like very sparingly. One of my other friends, he had an older brother, and we had scored some gold, some of the real Acapulco gold. Back in the day, it was there used to be some fool's gold, and then there was the real gold. And I just remember it just being like really light and fluffy, really golden. No seeds were in it. And it was really probably one of my first experiences with a really fine sativa, more of a sativa, because we used to get, a lot of the Mexican brickweed, Colombian brickweed, and that was sativa, but a lot of it was just filled with stems and seeds, and so it was really hard to find some really fine, really good sativas back in the day.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like craft cannabis versus commercial these days. You find some really kind bud that comes around every now and then.
Yeah, well, back then too, most of those things, this was all outdoor weed, as most of
Mm,
it was being grown in Colombia or South America, Mexico and stuff. So, really talking early 80s, late 70s type of, you know, era. And by the time I graduated in 84. So right around that
okay.
time was a lot of that was really starting to disappear. That's what, like I was saying, I probably saw the first kind bud. It was probably 82, 83. And, once that started coming around, that really kind of started changing, the whole landscape of connoisseur and good weed being available at the time.
Yeah, that was, my kind of, I really started paying attention in the 90s. And I'm in on the West Coast, so the Pacific Northwest in the 90s. Good time, good era, but it's fun to learn more about the East Coast because even today, the East Coast and the West Coast, there are subtle differences, flavors, the way things worked. But I do remember back at that time, not many things had a name either. I used to always joke, it's like it's called got some or don't got some. So that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, really, the name game didn't really start coming around until about the mid 90s or so. Um, from what I remember, well, there was always the names from Amsterdam. We shouldn't say that,
Right.
because in the late 80s, I had friends that were going over to Amsterdam and they were getting seeds, and I had some friends in the early 90s that actually had smuggled some. It was AJ actually that had smuggled some
Okay.
silver pearl, if I'm
Yep.
not mistaken. He brought some.
Scentsy
He had
seeds.
Yeah, so he had gotten some of that flower back over into New York, and I was able to experience that. And that was right around the time when all of the names really started being relevant at that time. It was in the mid 90s for sure, probably like 94, 95, and and the indoor American grow scene really started to take foothold at that
Yeah.
time. And you had to know someone that was growing, but that information was starting to spread at that time.
Yeah, I know kind of looking back, like Tom Alexander, The Sensimilia Tips was a magazine that was kind of going around. I know that was, a lot of Northern California, that was a big deal. And Greg McAllister up in Seattle with the lighting store, and there were some things happening there. You mentioned Amsterdam though, which is near and dear to my heart. I got back actually a month to the day ago. I got back from Amsterdam.
Mm,
I was there for a month, and
nice.
I'd been there a couple years ago. Have you ever made the trip yourself?
Yeah, I was there back in 2012, and I was there for one of the last few High Times Cups there. The year before, they had gotten raided, had some problems. That year that I went, they still had it. It was scaled down. And then I think they might have had it like maybe one more year after that. And that was it. The mayor
Yeah.
and a lot of the things had changed, and
Mm.
the attitudes had changed, and so I never really got to I got to experience it, but not in the sense of when it was back in the day of its at its height. When
Yeah.
it was already on the downside when I went there. I got to meet everyone. I got to go to one of the last few Legend Cups, so that was a
Nice.
great experience. But I was more impressed by the hash than anything that was there. A lot of really
Yes.
good. I remember smoking some really good Nepalese cream that was very impressive. And they had, various other Afghanis and Moroccans and stuff. So that was the highlight of my trip of Amsterdam.
I would definitely agree to that. If you didn't see that big smile on my face when you mentioned the hash, because that's not something that you can walk into any of like the rec stores in the States and purchase.
No,
You know?
all that stuff was all the import. So all the import hash was just amazing. And at that time, I remember, dabbing had just started coming out. And so I remember we were dabbing in a coffee shop, and people were looking at us like, what the hell are these guys doing? They're doing, but what we were doing at the time was it was illegal, and I think it's still illegal. I think most concentrates like that are illegal in Amsterdam, and but that was fun at the time.
Yeah, that kind of blew my mind. A couple years ago was the first time I went there. So, I did miss the heydays of the 80s, but because of that heyday, it was almost like a Mecca trip for me. Like I had to go to Amsterdam at some point, and it was fun. It was well worth it. I now write for Sensi Seeds. I was just down in their the hash museum, since we're talking about hash, checking out a few things. That was a good time. But you do get a lot of those imports. But you're right, the climate there has drastically changed. They're still trying to kind of push things out. No concentrates. I haven't seen anybody smoking them in the bars either. There's no vape pens, but the Amsterdam in general is trying to push the red light out to a different section, which they're like, you can still have it, but we want the city center back. So go there before you can, folks.
Yeah. I thought some of that was just kind of was a little too seedy for me. I don't know.
Well, we stayed out during the daylight hours. We didn't go out during the nighttime.
Yeah, well, if you're walking around nighttime, there's a lot of people walking around. A friend of mine, he had gotten his phone stolen from him.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff. So, there was, you got to really be careful if you're out walking around at nighttime.
Yeah, it's a major city like anywhere. Things can and do happen,
Sure,
so be smart.
especially, well, he was high on acid and lost.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so there were a lot of contributing factors that made that happen, but nonetheless, you still got to be on your toes.
Definitely. Now, one shop that stood out to me, the one that we had to go back to first, it was called Katsu. It's in the Pipe neighborhood, which is kind of by the big daily market they have there. Did
Right.
you ever hit Katsu while you were there?
Yeah, sure. I was there. Yeah. I
Nice.
think they had the NL special.
They've got
Oh,
a lot of good stuff.
yeah, I believe they had the NL special.
They have a lot of hash. One hash we picked up, it just said sativa. It was really runny. We smoked some too late at night and did not get much sleep.
Right.
So it was a true upper.
Yeah, I mean, I was, kind of just being led around. We had a big group of people. We went there, the gray area. I'm trying to think of, some of the other ones we went to. I think, we used to always go to Barney's for breakfast in the morning.
So good.
So yeah, and I'd run across the street and see, I think I gotten some Dr. Green Spoon flour, and I think, well, these guys had some of the inside track on where to get the hash, who had the good hash at the time. And I think that's kind of the way that it works in Amsterdam is like,
Yeah.
you got to be in the know and be like, all right, go to this coffee shop. They have this and this. And things only last for so long over there. And
Yeah.
so you just got to be lucky at the right place at the right time to get some of that stuff.
Yeah, it's you know, it's a tourist thing. People travel there from, you know, different places in Europe. It's odd. Amsterdam kind of squandered the chance to be like the world capital of cannabis. The United States is where most people travel now, Colorado in particular, because out there there's actual social lounges. Or have they gotten moved into that yet?
They're just starting that up now. I know that there's one I've been to downtown. I believe that there's starts to be some other ones that are starting to open up. But you're right. Well, in a sense, you know, it was always America, I think, that was always driving pretty much the Amsterdam scene,
Hmm.
pretty much. You know, like, you know, you add all the Americans and then plus, you know, the surrounding European countries, and you really have something. But then once America, you know, started to go legal, and you take the the Americans out of that equation, now you're only left with, you know, a small European market. And yeah, now you're right. Now it's switched up to where we're the driving force. We've always been the passionate, you know, about the weed, and really the Dutch are businessmen. They
Hmm.
took advantage of the laws and the situation at the time, as would anyone, you know. But they're to me, they didn't really have any real passion for cannabis. Most of them smoke tobacco
Yeah.
with their head stash. And so, you know, when you go over there as an American, they see you, you know, rolling up a big spliff of you know, just straight weed. They think you're crazy. And you know, and then we're adding hash into it and everything else. You know, where they're taking their hash, breaking it up, putting it with tobacco, taking their weed, breaking it up, you know, putting it with tobacco. So when I get past one of those things, because I don't smoke
No.
tobacco, it has a real negative effect on me personally. So it's nothing that I enjoy. I usually wind up
Right.
choking out, and you know, when you're over there, when someone passes you something, you would just normally, you know, hit it, you know, but you know, after you know, get into a coughing fit, then you have to question anything else that would
Yeah.
come your way.
We learned early that when you buy a joint, you have to ask for pure.
Right.
Otherwise it's mixed. The tobacco, it's interesting because now they have like a filler. A lot of shops, there's no more tobacco smoking indoors. And that has actually in other parts of the country. Amsterdam, still smoke inside the coffee shop. Outside of Amsterdam, a lot of coffee shops you can't smoke in anymore just because people sneak tobacco into their joints. And if the, you know, health inspector whatever walks in, then this place can lose their license. I talked to him about it. It was a really weird thing, but most of it's takeaway now, which again is kind of backwards.
Yeah, I guess it takes away from the social aspect of it, because you know, people like to, you know, gather and enjoy and share cannabis, and so there's a real kind of bonding and social aspect to it, of being able to do that. And well, the thing is, you know, you take that away, then people are just going to go into parks, into open areas where they're going to be able to do that. And
Yeah.
all right, you might not be able to meet, you know, a whole bunch of different people. You'll be in your small circle of friends, but you still be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. And we, you know, we did just a lot of open air. It was weird getting used to it, but my buddy who works at Sensi Seeds, he's like, smoke anywhere. We're just like, no, let's go around the corner. He's like, lights it up. He's like, just smoke. People don't care.
Right. Well, in New York now, in New York City, you know, you're allowed to smoke anywhere in public, just as long as it's not state or city owned property. So, I mean, most of the parks, you know, were city owned. You're not allowed to smoke there, but they've been notorious since, you know, the
Yeah.
60s. You know, when Giuliani came in, they kind of, you know, snuffed some of that out, but it's made a big comeback now to where you walk around in New York and you just smell weed everywhere.
That's the dream. Being in Washington, one of the first states to legalize, us in Colorado, we did it on the same day. You know, you still can't grow at home. There is no like public smoking. So when new states pass laws where like anywhere you can smoke a cigarette, you can smoke weed, we're just like, fuck. So hopefully that changes here.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy on how, some of the states, well, with Colorado and Washington being, one of the first, states to go rec, they were kind of setting an example, and, it could have gone either way. So they kind of went on a more stricter, safer side to where, people couldn't be like, well, this is a free for all and, whatever, So now that's kind of changed now, but, where you see a lot of other more liberal states, opening that have opened up, like Oklahoma, where just I think it's $3,000 buys you a license. There's no
Yeah.
cap on them. Anyone can pull up and get into business. And in a sense, that should be, the way it should be. The strong will survive. Competition.
Yeah.
Not everyone's gonna be able to make it. When they start limiting and putting caps on stuff, it opens up a whole thing for be able to get into corruption and favoritism, and that's kind of like what's happening now in New York and New Jersey, to be able to get a license, and the whole process is just really geared towards big money, because just say for instance, for someone like me, if I want to get a cultivation license, well, I'd have to secure a location first. So that means I'd have to rent some type of warehouse or location, which, if you're going to have just say 10,000 square foot warehouse, 20,000 square foot warehouse, yeah, you're talking, tens of thousands of dollars a month in rent. All right. So they want you to secure that location, and then, well, hopefully it will fall under the jurisdiction of the zoning, you know,
Yeah.
and then, you would be able to put in your applications with hopes of be able to get that. And then, that becomes a whole nother, exhausting process of doing the application and such. And there's a lot of community ties that are involved, and promises, and for someone like me, it just doesn't make sense on gambling your life savings away on the hopes of getting a license.
That's exactly the thing. It's price prohibitive, and that's even before you get the yes or no on your license. A lot of people, this is before the application process. You have to have the building, which again will have the electricity demands that it'll meet it. You have to get the right zoning. You have to get friendly with everybody else. You're paying all these expenses with a hope. I'm in the same situation here. There was only a limited number of licenses. I can't get them. We have a consolidation game here where the big players keep buying up the smaller licenses, but they don't actually produce under that canopy space, because then there's less supply. Less supply equals more demand. More demand equals a higher price. Not that it's a great price structure for wholesalers here, but I don't feel fucking sorry for them. But yeah, Oklahoma would be awesome, because that's something that I could and would get started in today. I just can't move there. So
yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of different factors in Oklahoma situation. I see it being pretty much as the Oregon situation.
Yeah.
But really, they talk about giving people social equity and legacy, this and that. And then when you really look into it, and then you read the fine print, all right, they want you to be, on the social equity, right? They want you to be convicted, cannabis, and have a record and stuff. But what they don't tell you is they want you to have run a successful business for 2 years with a
Wow.
minimum of 5 employees. All right,
Yikes.
and then they're taking non-refundable applications for
Mhm.
$2,000 or $3,000, and this is really geared towards the social equity thing, and people that want to do more of the craft,
Mhm.
smaller the smaller licensing. But a lot of that stuff, like for me, you have to be a 2-year resident. You have to
Yeah.
live in that. You have to live in that town, or live in the bordering town of that, to
Wow.
be able to qualify for that license. And then they're only going to allow maybe 2 or 3 licenses. That's even if the town opted in. So, and
Right.
then the town's going to be like, well, how many licenses are we going to allow? Or we're going to allow 5 licenses. We're going to allow 3 for social and the minorities, and the other 2 can go full retail. And so when so I'd only be able to qualify for the retail, and being able to compete against the other people and being able to qualify with locations and all that stuff, it's just you can't do it. You just can't do it. It's not geared towards legacy or
No.
small people. It's only geared towards big business. you know
Yeah.
um,
At this point, even just, as much passion and desire as we have to do something like that from a business standpoint, it's not a good decision at this point. There's a lot of companies out there, it's called the Amazon model. It's like, I'm willing to lose money for 3 years because I know you'll be out of business in 2.
well when you're
I can't play that game.
Yeah, well, when you're dealing against hedge fund and Wall Street type of people, this is what we're talking about. Because we're talking about big business here. In the end,
Yeah.
it's going to attract those type of people. These are investors. These people invest in companies and businesses for a living, and it's just not with cannabis, it's across the board. So if they see an opportunity to be able to monopolize a certain industry, that's they're going to do so, and really it's structured for them to be able to do that.
Mhm.
Even the way that it's structured, um, being in New York, as a farmer, you cannot sell directly to the dispensary. You're going to have to sell to a wholesaler. And then the
Yeah.
wholesaler is going to now sell to the dispensary. So who's gonna get fucked in the end. The farmer's gonna get fucked,
Yeah.
because the wholesaler is gonna be like, well, we're only gonna give you this much a pound, I'm sorry, take it or leave it. And then he can turn it over to the dispensaries and be like, well, the same thing now. I'm going to double or triple my money, take it or leave it. And a lot of that depends on the quality, the supply and demand, and so there's a lot of
Mhm.
moving parts in that. But in the end, it doesn't give the farmer much power to be able to, move his product, or set or dictate the price of what he wants to get for his product.
Yeah, and this is kind of true of traditional agriculture as well. The farmer always gets paid the least.
Right. And then really, in the retailer, the dispensaries, they're just going to buy it and just double the price. And so it
Yep.
doesn't matter what they pay, they're just going to, whatever, we're going to double the price, just as long as it fits into the current market
Yeah. Yeah.
prices, so I don't, and really a lot of it isn't really geared on quality, it's all geared on price. So
Price and THC percentage.
right, but and as what we're finding out is that a lot of these high THC things are just they don't cut it. They might look good and they smell good, but when you actually smoke them, they taste like cardboard. The
No.
high is boring, or it doesn't do anything, and so for me, I go with my own passion. That's what I've always bred, and growing up, from the late 70s, the 80s, the 90s. So I've been able to experience a lot of good cannabis. So, in
Yeah.
breeding, I've incorporated my taste and my experiences into my breeding, and the plants that I've come in contact with, I've tried to, make some kind of some kind of I'm trying to think of the word, but I wanted to make some kind of seed form and representation of that clone. So
Right.
even though if the seed only represented like 75% of that original clone, I really considered that a success. So just trying to get that personal stock for myself, building up a personal library of clones that pass through my hands, because in the past we've lost a lot of stuff. So I just wanted to have some kind of representation in seed form, be like, all right, well, we lost a clone, or we can find it in the seed. So, and that's really
Thank you.
where I started. That's where I really started, with my breeding, and then getting those I would keep a certain amount of seeds for myself, and then I would just try to get those other seeds out there, and they've the seeds kind of just made their own reputation for themselves. It's a lot of
Yeah.
what other people did with them, what they found with them, and how they advanced or worked with the genetics as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I love that. And I want to expand on that. We're talking about a lot about the commercial stuff, but let's go back to the good old days when, cannabis just kind of sold itself. And you mentioned kind of the mid 80s is when really kind bud started coming around. Uh, what was that like in the terms of just kind of the cannabis scene in New York when some of these, we'll call them elite strains, started coming around? And do you remember what that was like as far as kind of the hit or miss of finding those?
It was rare. It was really rare because, back then there weren't many local growers, so most of the stuff that we got in New York was imported.
Okay.
So, like I was saying, if, one of the really last amazing batches of import that I remember was the Eagle Tie, and that was back in 1989. And my local guy that I knew who was a dealer, he was pretty much on the up and up what was in New York City, and he was able to get these, and they were just pressed bricks. They
Oh,
had
wow.
they were wrapped in saran wrap, and they had these a paper in there that was stamped with an eagle on it, and
Nice.
that batch became quite famous. It was a prior batch, I think, had gotten confiscated. There was a particular photo that was in the New York Times with that same stamp on it. The book, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Tie Stick.
No, but
Mike
I should
Mike
look it up.
Ritter, Mike Ritter,
Mike Ritter.
and yeah, a lot of that is actually documented. You know,
Oh, cool.
it was quite amazing. So yeah, and we would see, a lot of different stuff. Once people started to grow locally, uh, actually, my friend started growing at the time too. He was one of the first people I saw with an indoor
Nice.
grow. He was getting his seeds from Amsterdam back in the day. So this was like in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, he had an apartment right off of Times Square, and he in the building. I think he rented almost every apartment in the building except for one, and it was
Yeah.
some guy that was an actor. He lived up in Albany, and he'd go back and forth to Albany, and he wasn't much of a bother and wasn't in the building
No.
so much. So the guy used the upper floor as a grow room. So that was like one of the first grow rooms that I ever saw, which I was just amazed and everything. And
Yeah.
so so really back in the day, it was really kind of trying to secure the connection if you're able to get kind bud, and if they were getting it on a regular basis,
Right.
just trying to
Man.
nail that down was a tough thing, because there was so many people that were looking for it that it would just get bought up
Yeah.
in a minute. So
Really.
when I met Mike Klopp the Weasel, he was the first grower that I met that was like looking to sell his weed. So when I got the opportunity, I was just like, "Listen, man, I'll buy everything you have. I have cash. There's no reason for you to, risk yourself and hustle out here and in the park and walk around." And so,
Yeah.
we started meeting down at the wetlands. And so, I didn't know him well, just someone I had met in the park. And so,
Right.
he would show up with a bag and I would show up with money, and we'd make an exchange, and, we'd keep in touch. And when he was ready, I was ready.
Always ready. Always be ready when you
Right.
have that. Man, it's been so long, but I do remember having to have like that Rolodex of people you could actually go through to like, okay, you got some this week? Wow, yeah. Luckily that's a distant memory, but yeah, that definitely was real.
Right. Well, I mean, back then, I mean, there were things that a lot of people, wouldn't, they can't relate to with today. It's called the
Mhm.
drought, and it's not being able to find weed. And there were, I mean, the last drought I remember was in 1990, and the streets were filled with cocaine, and you couldn't find weed anywhere.
That
You
seems so
know,
weird. But yeah, we'd always definitely in Washington we experienced that July August drought. We're like, man, people need to start pulling stuff down because there's
right?
no more weed.
Right. Well, I mean, and you're talking, you know, when people were actually growing. This is pre
Outdoor.
that, when you couldn't even fall back on local grow. I mean, there was really there wasn't any in 1990. So it was really pretty much all imports. But by that time, they had pretty much cracked down on all of the southern imports and all the imports that were
Mm,
coming in through Mexico and South America. And once they started having a hard time smuggling that, they just started smuggling the harder drugs, cocaine and heroin. And that just kind of dried things up. And during that time, well, probably previous to that is really, you know getting into like 1984, 85 is kind of when the indoor thing started in Washington and Portland with Seattle Greg and all those people with first indoor grow shops and first indoor lighting. A lot of that stuff was unheard of, and so
Yeah.
if you're thinking, if that really started in the mid 80s, it took, another 5 years, but by the time that information, got to the East Coast and everything, and, Amsterdam did have a big part of cultivating a lot of that stuff too, because people were able to go over to Amsterdam and be able to get the concept of indoor growing.
Right.
And so they started, when my friend first started, I remember he was using a Rockwell back then. I didn't know what is that, and so, those early years of the mid 80s to early 90s was a real big learning and growing in the indoor scene to kind of combat the lack of weed, the lack of imports and stuff that were coming into the country. But also you had the outdoor Cali thing going on at the same time too, but that was seasonal, so and you would get kind of experience what you're saying, all right, you would be able to get weed up until the summertime, and then that crop was over, and now you're waiting for everyone to harvest, like what you're talking about. So that kind of leads up into that time period of what you're talking about.
Yeah, one thing that always seemed to be around, and I see some people mentioning it in chat as an East Coast thing too, but beasters. Do you remember beasters? Was that a thing on the East Coast as well?
Yeah,
Canadian, just like
yeah.
not good. You'll take it because it's the only thing around weed.
Well, that was kind of like the beasters kind of took up the demand, met the demand of the kind bud. So there was, a really, at that time that, you had to know someone that was growing indoors, so I was lucky enough, like I said, to know the weasel. And so he was constantly growing, and he, expanded, got his friends involved, and, and then all of a sudden we became like this little crew of people that were loosely, affiliated. Some of us knew each other, some of us didn't. So during that time, that stuff, I would get, 3 or 4 pounds, in a heart, and I would be his whole harvest.
Right.
And I'd have people come up and be like, "I'll buy it all," and I'd be like, "Sorry, dude. You'll be lucky if I sell you a half a pound if I like you." You know what I mean? And so I had to put limits actually on what I used to sold. So it was usually a quarter-pound limit. I would occasionally bend and sell someone a half a pound. It was all, all on supply and demand. I mean, I had people lining up the door just waiting for that. Other weed dealers that would buy it, for their head stash. So, it really created a lot of other opportunities for me for favors, and people let me cherry pick, or be like, "You're the first one. I'm calling you. Come over. I have this. I'm doing a favor." So it went favor for favor. So I was able to, kind of parlay that into other things.
Yeah.
And so the Canadians really, so during that time when the beasters came down, they kind of filled that void. It was kind of like it wasn't kind bud, but it wasn't pressed Mexican either. It was kind of like in the middle.
Right.
And sometimes you would get like some pretty decent ones. I could say, I mean, I've seen the worst of the worst, and but sometimes they would have stuff that was named OG Kush,
Mm.
Bubba Kush,
Oh, but yeah,
I remember
remember that
seeing,
one.
I remember having, the Bubbas were pretty big, Beaster Bubbas, and they were halfway decent, so it depended on, when, if you knew the guy that was, because it was the same thing. It was kind of like when going out shopping in Cali, like, you get 100 pack, you got, it's a mixed bag of, who knows, 10 or 20 different things in there. So it might be only 5 of these or maybe 10 of those. And so you'd have to go through and cherry pick the really good ones. And they would just, and they just call them trips. So they would just get a
Hmm.
trip, and really what they would do is get a trip, and then they'd go through and cherry pick all the good ones, the good cushes, if they had a sour
Okay.
or anything that had a recognizable name to it. And they would
Right.
add more money to those. And
Hmm.
then the other ones, the other cheaper ones, they kind of let those ones let those ones go cheaper. So there was a little bit of a game and juggling that went involved in what they were getting and what they were selling. And so, like I was saying, depending on, when, if you knew the guy and you were able to get in there and cherry pick some early ones, you'd be able to get some decent ones. But if you were the last guy coming in, then you were getting bottom of the barrel.
Right. Right. Yeah. Fortunately, I've never known that, crushed Mexican brick weed in the Pacific Northwest. It was always kind. The Beasters was about as low as we went over here, so it was nice.
Right. Well, it depends on when you came up. You came up during that
90s,
time,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and so, I mean, there's a lot of people now that could say, "Well, I've never experienced, weed being illegal." As
Yep.
crazy as that sounds. So there's a real, the
Yeah.
generation gaps and experiences are pretty wide.
Yeah, I say sometimes too, for that generation, I feel kind of bad because they never have the experience of the dealer's couch. I mean, the dealer's couch is where you met people from, like different schools, different areas. It's where you had like wild topics you've never even thought of or heard of before. And then you just kind of open your mind. But because you couldn't just come and go, you always had to hang out for like 20, 30 minutes and then smoke the weed that you just bought with the person you sold it or bought it from. So,
And that's the kind of experience I created in New York. When I got an apartment. Actually, I shared an apartment with someone, and I didn't live there. He lived there. He had an extra bedroom, and I sold weed out of it. And so that was the kind of experience that I tried to create, where it wasn't like a huge place, but you'd be able to get a small room of 4 or 5 people, and you just come in with all different walks of life, and and people have different experiences, and so you get to share, and meet different people. And yeah, that dealer couch talk is, it's part of the whole social
yeah.
experience, kind of like being at a coffee shop.
Yeah, well said. That's why we need them. Um, I wanna ask though. I know this is probably a subject you've talked about many times. The piff though. When did the piff come into the scene for you or for New York? Because I'm on the West Coast. I honestly can say I'm not convinced I have ever actually smoked it myself. I'm so far removed from that scene.
Well, when I started, hustling in Central Park in 1992, that's probably when I first saw the piff.
Okay.
Back then, there were numerous dealers in the park, and everyone had different connections, and everyone had different weed. So you would, I was always a connoisseur, so, like, it didn't matter, who had the good weed. I would going by, and I remember buying a gram for $30.
Damn.
You know, yeah, and I mean, and it was just Jamaican guy that used to come in, and he knew someone that had a grow room, and the weed that he used to get was just you just never saw it. It was anything like it before, and he'd only have maybe an ounce or two, or I mean, it was
Right.
very, very, very limited. So when you saw him walking in the park, you just knew, when he didn't come to hang out, he came to
Right.
sell weed. So when you saw him, I knew right away, like, yo, go check out Rick. And his name Jamaican Rick, and like the weed that he had was just, for the time, and it was $30 a gram. And so I would buy a gram or two just to treat myself. And, I wouldn't
Yeah.
get crazy or anything, but, that's the way it was back then. And, when he wasn't around, that was it. That weed wasn't around. And so, when the piff, that used to be around, some of the Spanish guys had it. Um, there's one white guy I knew had it, and we became pretty friendly. He had, connections uptown and knew some Dominicans and stuff. So I started getting it through him on a regular basis. And yeah, I mean, it would just always be kind of wet and kind of leafy and just, but when you smoked that stuff, it was just, it's
Well,
just like
that's
one of those weeds that kind of like what I was saying, like, when things are that special and that exclusive, but luckily the piff wasn't exclusive, it was, being mass produced. But at the time, it's all about who so if you
yeah.
don't know, you know,
When
then you
there's
don't
only a
know
few
anyone.
ounces, yeah, when there's
Yeah.
only a few ounces floating
Yeah.
out there.
Right. But that was that one guy, one thing. But like for the piff, that was more of a commercial, mass produced thing. And so if you weren't in the know of going uptown or knew someone up there, like it really wasn't going to be, unless you caught it in a park or something like that. Not a lot of white guys were getting it back then, So, um,
Right.
yeah. But
Lucky, one of the lucky few though. You knew early.
yeah, but really what happened though was back then, so back in the really in the mid '90s there, the time that I'm talking about the park and everything is like, there was a lot of cocaine on the streets, a lot of heroin on the streets. So uptown they used to have these coke spots and crack spots, and eventually they turned those spots into weed spots. Like, it was kind of, a whole kind of revolution started up there where they started, people started preaching to get away from the hard drugs. A lot of rappers were, starting
Good.
getting into weed. That's really
Right.
when Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, all those guys started coming out in the early '90s. And there was a whole movement to try to get away from hustling hard drugs into more, hustling weed and stuff like that. So it kind of changed the culture a little bit up there.
It did, and that Dre album, The Chronic, was responsible. I almost hear, stories of the Piff is like there's so many things that are called it that aren't it. It reminds me, almost on the West Coast, everything was like chronic, and I want to, probably credit that to Dre. But like, if it was really good, people would be like, "Yeah, I got the Chronic."
Well, that's what they used to call anything really good the chronic, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how, the diesel started, we used to call everything the diesel, the
Mhm.
chronic, there was all these catch names that were around back in the day, because there really was no real name for that particular weed that used to come around. So you just be like, yo, you got more of that diesel or more of whatever.
One strain that's really dear to my heart, it's my top three of all time that I've seen you work a lot with is the Chemdog. And there's many, varieties or takes on it. Chem Sis, Chemdog 4, Chem 91. Can you maybe tell us what is your favorite one, or some of the things that you like about all of them? I don't know. I just love the strain.
Well, originally, the Chem 91 was the first chem that I experienced, that and the Super Skunk. The Weasel had traded Chemdog up in Massachusetts. He met him at a fish show. They exchanged numbers. He drove up there with a friend. They brought clones. They traded clones. He brought my Super Skunk 91 down to his room. I was his dealer, sold all of his weed, so I got exclusive on that 91 and Super Skunk. And so I was getting that, and so that was really my first experience, and really, something that I never had before, and people just started going crazy for it, because no one ever saw anything like that before, so I didn't know what to make of it. And then once they smoked it, they were just like, "That's the best shit I ever had." And so there was a huge demand for it.
Yeah. Was there anything in particular that you enjoyed about the Chem 91 in general? Was it in your head stash, or was it just more of this was a good demand product?
No, I mean, I would, if I got it, I'd keep as much as I could, for my head. But yeah, people just, like I said, they just, they never saw weed like that before. So, and then, and so I was only back then. I was only selling it. Going through most of the '90s. I started first growing in the late '90s, but I didn't first start growing Chemdog. I think I'm trying to think, Oasis it might have been, or something like that. But I had gotten an apartment in New York, and the Weasel gave me some clones, and I started growing there, but it didn't last very long, because I blew out the power, and it created a huge problem, and I couldn't fix the power. I had to bring people in, and so
Yeah.
at that time, luckily, some guy I knew that was selling weed, he had a building, and he had a grow thing. His friends had a grow thing, and they were having problems. And I went down there, I looked at it, and I was, yeah, I could help you. And then, so when that happened, I was able to move all my plants down to their spot, and so we, grew there for about a year or so. And I didn't really start, and once that ended, I didn't really. It was about a year or so, and I was looking for a spot, and I found one up in the Catskills, and so I started growing up there, and that was really my first serious, like, kind of commercial grow. I had like 5 lights, in the basement, and so it was really geared more towards just growing flower and trying to sell it. And so, yeah, I was able to, once I started growing, I started getting access to some of these clones, the Nigerian silk, the HP13. I wound up getting the Chemd, and so when I got the Chemd, and was able to experience that, I was just like, yeah, it's even better than the 91. And then that's kind of like when I really started making seeds. And really my very first cross, I had gotten super silver haze from Greenhouse, and then I crossed that into a sour diesel.
Nice.
And I never released those seeds. I think I still have some of them.
Oh wow.
And then I remember I crossed that into the Nigerian, and I started just tinkering around. I was like some of the very first few crosses that I made. But then probably even prior to me getting the ChemD. But once I got the ChemD, it was just, to me, it was just a game changer. And by that time, I had tinkered around enough to where I wanted to start looking at breeding a little more seriously. And what I really thought was like, well, we're getting all these clone only strains, kind of like some of the strains I named, sour diesel, all these strains, but but we don't have a male. Like I have nothing to, like, what are you going to use to cross into this, So the only seeds that were available were from Amsterdam. And by that time, it was really kind of draw the luck, when you're getting seeds from there. Because I was a big fan of Sensi seeds, like I loved all of their strains, like the NL5 Haze, the Afghans, the hash plant. I mean, all of them were just so, the Mr. Nice strain, all those were just so, inviting to me, and so I decided, I was like, they're probably, the best, that I was who I knew the best. So a friend of mine was going out there. I think I gave him like $1,000, and I was like, just, get me a whole bunch of give me a whole bunch of seeds, So actually, I think I had a catalog, and I actually, wrote down a list of what I wanted, So.
Oh, yeah.
I wound up getting the Hindu Kush.
Oh yeah. I always keep this by my desk.
Yeah. I wound up getting a Hindu Kush, Afghan One, NL5 Haze, the Hash Plant, Skunk Kush. There were a couple other ones I can't really remember, but I think Early Skunk was another one I had gotten. So yeah, I was like, all right. So, I had gotten all these seeds from Sensi, and so I decided that I was going to start growing some of them out to see what I was gonna what they were going to turn out to be and stuff. And so when I really started the ChemD project, really, I really had it down to either the Hindu Kush or the Afghan. So, after I had grown both of them out, I didn't really like the Afghan. It was kind of short, and the buds were kind of airy, and it was kind of leafy, and I was kind of looking for more pure indica, and the Afghan one kind of fit that bill. It was more wide leaf. The buds were a lot more bigger and thicker, and it was like single stalk. It wasn't as leafy and stuff. Kind of had like a piney, like medicine-y taste to it.
Okay.
And it had a decent high. It wasn't like super strong, but I was like, all right, this is so that's why I picked, to be my outcross to the ChemD. And so at the time, the ChemD, I was like, I'm going to create my own male. So I decided on the ChemD, and I decided on the ChemD because that was the strongest thing I had at the time. It was my favorite weed. You know, I didn't know it was going to be what it is now. You know what I mean? It's just no,
Right.
I just knew that I had it, and it was like the best thing that I had. So I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to make my mail out of. So, you know, I just started crossing the Afghan to the Chemd, you know, and then I back crossed it to and that made the double dog. Um, at that time, um, I had had come in contact with Joe B. At that time, IC Mag was just starting to get really big. The overgrowth scene, I think they had gotten busted, and so Joe B was one of the first people that put a post out about Chemdog. Like when I first got the Chem 91, I didn't know what it was, and so I did some research on it and see if anyone else knew what it was. And there was just this one thread, Joe B, Chemdog. And so I started talking to him about the chem dog. I was like, I got the chem dog. He's like, he couldn't, believe it. And eventually, we started putting all the, pieces of the puzzle together. I connected him and chem dog Greg, and
Okay.
they reunited. He Chem sent him some of the remaining Chem 4 4 seeds. Joe
Okay.
popped them, wound up finding the Chem 1, 2, 3, 4. He wound up sending me the 4. I sent him I think some double dog seeds. And then later I wound up, I made the tray dog after the double
Hmm.
dog. So I just back crossed it, so it was the double back cross with the tray dog. After he gave me the Chem 4, I just crossed that into the Chem 4 and I made the Stardog. Um, I wound up, I wound up popping some of those seeds. I found the Corey Haim probably in the first few. I only popped, I think, only, at the time I was still doing production. So I was doing this side breeding on the side. And what I would do a lot of the times was either I would put them in when the round was finishing, I would put the breeding plant in at the end of the cycle. So when the plants threw
Right.
pollen, either the plants were going to get cut down like within days or they were out of there, and so once the pollen blew, then I would able to put in the next round in that was vegging. And so I created a cycle like that just to be able to do these little breedings, and so I made this Stardog. I found the Corey Haim cut, and I thought it was amazing.
Yeah.
I started giving that out. I gave it to AJ, and he's the one that actually, when he was cutting it the night that Corey Haim died. And so he was
Man.
like, "Yeah, this shit is the shit that killed Corey." So that's kind of like that's how that Stardog cut got named the Corey Haim.
Oh man.
I wound up. I think I sent that cutting and seeds out to Joe in California, and he was up in Humboldt and all that, and so he wound up giving that cutting started making its way around. Some of those seeds started making its way around, and it just really blew up on its own and really started making its own reputation. And it was really what Joe did with it and what his friends and other people that, started to blow the Star Dog up. And then I think it was in 2009, I think Kyle Cushman took it down to San Francisco to the High Times Medical Cup, and it think it placed second or something like that. And
Nice.
so that's when it really started to get, recognition. I started getting recognized for my work, and it just really snowballed from that. It was really nothing I really intended to do, but being a hustler, selling weed and working in construction, and like I really recognized the potential. So once that started happening, it just really gave me more incentive to start making more stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was really based on, like I was saying, my personal taste. A lot of the strains that were available and popular in New York City at the time, the Sour Diesel, the Piff, the HP13, and anything else. At that time, I was just on a quest to try to get as many different clones, or do as much research. And when you become a weed nerd, it's just all becomes about details. And so with that said, I can't think of the number of clones that have passed through my hands, throughout the years of growing. And probably the mass majority of them, they didn't make the cut. There was a lot of things that might have been really good and relevant at that time, but as time goes on, things get passed up. New things come
Yeah.
out, people's tastes change, and so what's popular today becomes forgotten. What's popular tomorrow today gets forgotten tomorrow. And so, and that chain just keeps going on. And so there's only very few strains that really kind of like pass the test of time. And so and chem and sour and haze, and a lot of those strains are just some of them. And they were just the ones that I was familiar with, growing up and coming up, in my experience. But people like like you were saying, that were on the West Coast, were totally detached from most of that stuff. And
Yeah.
where some of those more popular clone only strains did make their way over to you. A lot of the more rarer strains, like the Piff, did not. And
No.
that's really because the Dominicans and the Cubans and the guys that were controlling that stuff, that was very closely held. And it's only been, I wound up getting the black haze back in like probably 2012 or something like that.
Okay.
And it was just something that Money Mike came up with. He knew someone that got it to him on the forums. And I wasn't really sure if it was really the real thing or not. When I grew it, I was kind of skeptical. It was a real bitch to keep, and I wound up losing it, but I did wind up doing a little bit of work with it.
Cool.
So, it's just really, it's really just, going through and learning, the strains, and, really experiencing the flower first, and seeing if that is, if it's good enough to be able to, take the time to, grow it out and make it come out, like you expect it to. And if it's good enough, then you can breed with it.
Breeding with intention and knowing what you're working with, so important and so underrated, I think, sometimes these days. Is just the basic legwork of doing those things.
Well, you
So
need, you need to have a vision on what you're doing, and
Yes.
you need, and what and what the outcome is going to be. You just can't just throw like two things together and
Right.
expect a miracle. And maybe sometimes it does happen. Genetics are really funny. But it's just like
Yes.
playing the lottery, or
Yeah.
playing a slot machine. Is this gonna pay off? Am I gonna get a winner on this one? And the percentages, most of the time not. So if you start with stuff that's high caliber, high quality and stuff, um, then your chances are going to be a lot more, to get something really good at the end. So when you're putting, and it's really knowing genetics and knowing cannabis. So you got to really know the strains that you're using, and if I'm going to cross A to B, I'm expecting a certain profile and taste and structure and the finishing time and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
and sometimes things come out the way we envision it, and sometimes it doesn't. And like I said, genetics is it's very tricky. A lot of it's kind of like dog breeding, because
Mm.
you're trying to um, concentrate on a specific phenotype. And just like a dog, you have a champion dog, and you're kind of you want to kind of concentrate on those genetics and trying to reproduce that dog as close as you can to get another champion dog. And it's kind of like the same thing when you're trying to reproduce certain strains, where you're trying to uh, you know uh, get all of those genetics, tighten that genetic pool up. And so where you're not going to get a lot of variance or variables or different, you want something that's going to be true.
100%. And that comes from experience and from working the lines. And that's kind of one thing that I saw with a lot of the genetics from Amsterdam is they may not have been the most flavorful, they may not have been the most potent, but the reliability of kind of what they're passing on is easy to almost pick out from whatever you're working with if you have something stronger on this end. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but I think the way that I feel about Amsterdam, I think like Neville, in his heyday, really, in '89 and '90, it was he was kind of at the pinnacle of his breeding, the peak of his breeding, and that's when he got into his troubles. And so when he got into his troubles, we all know that he passed his company on to Sensi Seeds, and it became Sensi Seed Bank. And so those early '90 years, they were still working with the majority of Neville's, mother stock, his plants. They took over everything, the Cannabis Castle, which was his,
Yeah,
and all of
yeah.
that. So they pretty, so, but but then we see a big shift in the quality and the reliability in the genetics. And by 1995, they came out with the Jack Herrera, which was a big hit, a cup winning strain. And then after that, it just kind of went downhill, the breeding. I don't know what happened. When the original packs that I bought were the original cellophane packs. They just had the
Hmm.
card in them, and they gave you 15 or 16 seeds. They gave you quite a bit of seeds for back that in that time. And I think it was like 15 to 16 seeds per pack.
Nice.
And so, but then they changed the packaging to the boxes and in the bubble. And once that happened, I bought both packs. And a friend of mine, really, what happened was he went to the 95 cup, bought a pack of Jack Herrera, brought it back, started growing it. And it was phenomenal. I mean, the stuff was,
Nice.
it was going, I think, like 77 to 84 days, but they were getting like a quarter pound to a half a pound a plant. So, I
Okay.
mean, they were just crushing it, you know,
Okay.
but they were crushing it to the point where they oversaturated the market. And I had to tell them, yo, we got to cut this shit out. I can't sell it anymore. People just, it just, some things just, they have their run and it's over. So I was like, listen, we can't, you're gonna have to switch up to something else. And he's like, oh, no problem. I still have the rest of the pack left. I was like, all right, just kill. So I was like, just kill that plant, And this plant was like it was close to the Jack, the original Jack cut, the one the Dronkers had. It was
Okay.
real. I mean, it was really big. It was more of a bit on the hazy side. Just the tops were just forearms. It was just,
Yes.
unbelievable. I mean, the smell was unbelievable. It left the smell of haze in the room. It wasn't super strong, but it had really a unique, really nice taste to it, so that made it really popular. And they just, we just overdid it on it. So I told them, kill it. All right,
Yikes.
fast forward, 5 or 6 years. I'm like, yo, why don't you find that pack of Jack Herrera? Oh, I lost it. All right, so so I was like, all right, I'll just get you another pack. So this was when I was, I was on IC Mag. I had just started, starting to sell my seeds on a regular basis there, and they wanted to back then. They wanted to pay you. Your options of payment were a bank check or seed credit. So I mean, a
See,
bank check to me was just totally sketchy. Like it's
totally.
just
It's like, here you go.
totally exactly. It was just a paper trail with my name on it. If anything ever happened to IC Mag, I didn't know. It was coming from England. Like the whole thing was just sketchy.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, just give me some seed credit. So I knew I had seed credit. So all right, we need a pack of Jack Herrera. Bam, I got it. All right, so we get the box. I give it to him. He grows it out, and then when he hands me the weed, it's just
Not the same.
not the same. It was
Not the
just
same.
total gore. I mean, it was just a total nightmare. It was, so it was just, so disappointing, you know. So, it just really told me, and then I started hearing numerous stories of things and, yeah, so, after that, I just kind of started really just concentrating on my own stuff. I used their Afghan one as an outcross to the Chemdog, and then I used their NL5 haze as an outcross to the Nigerian silk. So those two were kind of like the foundations of my beginnings of the indica strain and a sativa strain. And so once I started building my own stock of I made got initial outcrosses, and then once I would got my own stock, I would just pick males from those certain crosses to try to mesh with whatever I was trying to do. So the chem stuff worked well with pretty much everything, with other chem sours and outcrosses. And then I did the with the Nigerian, and then I did the back cross, so that really became the Nigerian haze, and so that became really special, and so that was pretty much, the foundation. And then I, was able to cross out into other hazes and stuff. And so I just really started to broaden the spectrum of, the different genetics that were different but similar, that I thought that would mesh well. And and just knowing and experience, what each strain would bring to the table, and all that kind of stuff.
Was there anything in particular that you liked or looked for and used in the males? You said, it's nice to be able to kind of predict the plants. Did you have like a stud male that would always pass on this particular trait? Or I tend to get really passive males that usually let the female do their
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, and that's what you kind of hope for, because usually that's what your goal is try to reproduce the female, not the male. you know. Yeah, because you don't know what the male really brings,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. So that's really, really what you want to kind of concentrate on is trying to bring the traits out. But like with me, like my male was so inbred with the chem that I knew what that would bring, that
Nice.
what that male would bring. And so when I kind of outcross that to say like a bubble gum, I know
Mm,
what I'm envisioning is a fruity, gassy, kind of it's more of a stout plant.
nice.
And so, you gotta have a vision on what you're doing. But when I was breeding, like, I would never use the same male, oddly in the beginning. And, and that's kind of like, with the Stardog, it has, it's had different inceptions, because that very first breeding, the Corey came out of that, the Illuminati came out of that, and I think the Guava came out of that. So like there were three keeper cuts
Wow.
that
Yeah.
that became popular, that came out of that breeding. And I'm sure that there's other stuff that was out there too that just didn't make it to the top. But I made that one breeding and I killed the male, just thinking, oh, well,
Hmm.
if I need a male, I got plenty of seeds. I'll just pop another few seeds, find a male and use it again. Boom. And that's what I did with the second breeding of the Stardog. And um, out of the second one, it was good, but there was no nothing rose to the top like on the first one,
Okay.
and then I used a third one, and then the third one I called the purple male,
Hmm.
because in that breeding I I pollinated the sour diesel, uh, and the Chem 4, and I think the white, and there might have been a couple other ones. Oh, the purple. No, 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 that wasn't me. But those three. So what wound up happening was everything that male got bred into, they all showed like little hints of purpling, which
Hmm.
was like really like, so like some of the star dogs were like, they had a shade of purple to them. And
Okay.
some of the sour dogs had a shade of purple to them, and this, and everything had, so it was obviously from the male that purpling came from. And I would, I think it would probably might be some type of recessive Afghan, obviously.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know did that come from the Sensi side of it? It might well have could have, because I don't really think, I haven't really seen many other chems really purpling out much. Oh, and also the Chem91 also got got included in that breeding, and so the original New York City Diesel number 12 and number 10 came out of that breeding. I think the Kate Upton Stardog came out of that breeding, and there might have been like one or other two famous cuttings that came out of that breeding, you know. So, but then again, I did the breeding and killed the male, and that was it, you know. but now I could say now that's something I don't do. Once I start using a male, I keep that male around until I could really see what it throws. Depending on the male and what I want to do with it for the future, has a lot to do with it too. So you got to think about what that brings to the table, and then whatever that's you breed it into, what that's going to bring into it too. So some things work and some things don't work.
Yeah, I appreciate that you take the time to find these things out, because you're right. Not every male is gonna be the stud, and give some things that you want. It's kind of funny though. Now I'm gonna look at Stardog every time I get some, because I do enjoy that. Like, does it have the purple tinge to it? It's like finding that rare like import CD. You're like, but this is that edition. I kind of like that.
Right, but also when you're, envisioning something, you got to envision a flavor profile. And what's nice with the chems is like the chems are pretty dominant, and so and what works best is when you get a layered palate, so you can taste some chem, you can taste some fruit or some it's a layered palate where you're getting like 2 or 3 different flavors in one toke. You may get a high fruity intake, but a light chemi back end, and so that has a lot to do with picking, and pairing up plants to breed.
I like that. Well said. Those are kind of fun ones. I have one right now, a Westport grape juice. It's all candy grape on the inhale, but then somehow by the time you exhale it, it comes with a little bit of gas on the back end. It's nice. It's a total transformation. And like cannabis today, all of it's going to get you high. So at that point, what are we left with? We're left with like taste, smell, and then overall effects.
Yeah,
Overall
I wouldn't say all
though.
of it would get you high. You know what I mean? I would say depending on your habit, it's going to get you high. Because for someone like me, I smoke like an eighth a day, or say give or take an eighth a day. Now I'm smoking chem, I'm smoking OG, sour hazes. You know what I mean? So it's like I can take one good toke off of a bowl or a bong or something, and I'm going to be good for for a good 20-30 minutes, depending on where I am and how my intake of the day is. That can't be said with lower quality cannabis. You can give me a fucking ounce of some of that stuff, and like I could smoke that whole ounce, and I will not get as high as I would off of 1 or 2 hits of my really good stuff. And there's a certain what I like to call it is like a warm fuzzy blanket. It's just like a warm feel of security of like I don't know what that is, and only certain strains bring that to the table. That's the only way I can explain it. It's something that it's all about effect. Obviously, it's about your head, but also your body, and that's kind of one reason why, like, I like hash, like rosin and stuff like that. But the one thing that's missing for me with that is it just has no body to it. Like you'll
Mm,
get you
okay.
get a real head, but that inner glow almost like it's something I don't know. If you've experienced, then you know what I'm talking about.
Yep, yep. Mine is, gosh, it's kind of cool that I always call myself kind of a sipper of like weed, because my wife, she'll sit down and she'll just smoke a big fat bowl. I kind of get some good stuff, and like I'll have a toke every 20-30 minutes and just kind of go through the day, and I just like to sip it. I smoke it all day
Right,
long,
right,
but
right.
I smoke like half as much as her. But the feeling that you're talking about for me is when I start getting
Yeah,
just
the
that
head.
numbness and that tingling right here.
Yeah,
It's like a
yeah.
happy feeling for me. I'm like, this is good.
Right, right. And yeah, I mean, I have friends that they like to sit and roll up a blunt and smoke a whole blunt, 2 or 3 gram blunt themselves, and and that's what it's satisfying for them, but like for me, I that's just too much for me. Like, I mean, I can do it, don't get me wrong, you know what I mean, but it comes to the point of when you're wasting weed, like,
Yeah.
if I could take 2 or 3 hits within an hour, and that's every time I pack a bowl in a bong or a bowl, it's going to be a green hit. It's going to be a
Yeah.
freshie. Once you get down to halfway on that blunt, then it starts to get a little stale and everything, and it just not doesn't quite taste as good as the beginning.
Yes. I smoke out of my little chillum all day. Just this little
Sure.
piece. Just doot,
Yeah,
doot.
that's all. That's
Yep. The
all you
nice
need.
little
Some
green
really good
tokes.
oneies.
Yep. I dig that. Well, shoot, I know I could go for at least 3 or 4 hours with you. I initially said an hour. We're at an hour and a half right now, so I do want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, my
Um,
phone just went down to 20%, so we only have
okay.
20% left.
Okay. Can I sneak in a couple more? Do you have a couple minutes
Sure,
for?
sure.
Thank you so much. Again, you're well beyond the time I said to expect. So everybody in chat's loving this, by the way. But please, extra love to JJ for just taking the extra time, man, and hanging out. Chat, if you guys have questions, go ahead and throw them up. I'm gonna get to my one first. But you had a UW cross, and out here on the West Coast, we have the University of Washington, which we call UW. And there was this old story that they were growing experimental medicinal cannabis, and somebody broke into there and they got the cuts. And then for a while, there was some really good weed going around, and everybody called it that UW. That's the story. So I don't know if you know anything about that or if it's even related.
No, I mean, I don't. I think I might have heard that story once before, but I actually had 2 cuttings of UW. I had the actual UW, and then what did they call the other one? PNP Pacific Northwest hash plant. So
Yep.
one was purple. One was one would just turn straight up purple. It was more taller, looked more indica sativa hybrid. It had kind of a great berry kind of a tip to it. And then the UW that I used was short and kind of had like a cat pissy kind of a smell to it a little bit. And when you burned it, it kind of had a very unique kind of a smell in the air to it, kind of
Heck yeah.
spicy, like almost like Bubba-ish almost. So it really pointed towards a pure, more of a pure indica or hash plant type of a plant.
Okay.
And
Oh, I'm
but I
sorry.
don't know but the origins of it, I really don't know. I know it's a very old Pacific Northwest. It's yeah. I mean, it might have origins back to the original hash plant that went to Sensi originally. So yeah, that's
The-
all. And then I got it from someone from Washington. So yeah, I was just
it was,
lucky. Yeah, and it was
yeah,
something that I was able to have. I lost it, but I was able to make seeds with it, and that's the way it goes. I'd love to get it back. If anyone ever has it, just hit me up. I'll be willing to trade, and anything for trade.
yep, yep. Shoot, I'll get a couple questions up here. I know Dog Days had asked earlier. JJ, can you talk about HP7? And then down here we have, what about HP21? Can you maybe tell people what the HP and the numbers are?
Yeah. Well, the HP7 came from a breeding that I made. So I had that was the original male of that was a double dog HP1, and then I crossed that to the puck, and then I took a
Okay.
male of that and crossed it to the HP13. So then I popped some of those seeds, and the HP7, that was number 7, but that was like the shortest plant out of that run. So everything else was big and stretchy, kind of like the HP13. But that number 7 was really short and squat, and that really more resembled the puck. So that was the story behind the number 7. It was, it's something that was just, everything else is big and that was short, so it's something that you kind of like, oh, look at that. That's something that's different, so, and it was different, and so, yeah, I did that, and I did a little bit of breeding with that. And the HP21, I wound up finding out I wound up finding the original mother of the HP13. This, from what I remember back in the day, of the HP13 from the original people, and some of the strains that they used to talk about and that were available at the same time. So I was always intrigued by that certain strain. It's a landrace strain, and numerous people sell it. There's at least on the market now like 2 or 3 different people that sell it, and I would buy it, grow it out, and be like, oh, all right, that's not it. And then I did it like 2 times, and then someone obscured kind of popped up on the internet, and there's just an old collector, and he claimed to have these strains, and so I was like, all right, I'll buy a pack. So I bought a pack, and there was 2. I think I only popped 4 seeds. They were all female. 2 of them were big and stretchy, and the other 2 were kind of more shorter, and they were more kind of single stalk, like Afghan type plants.
Okay.
And so I was growing them, and then I started smelling one of the more stressier ones. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? And it's like really garlicky, and I'm like, what, and then I didn't recognize it right off the bat, but I knew it was something. And then when I finally finished it and finished the flower, it was just, the light bulb went off on my head. I was like, HP15. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I was like, that. This is it, And so I was like, the thing that I thought that I had closest to it was that same male that I used for HP13. So I used that. But what had happened was when I got the Udub, I crossed that into the UW, and then I back crossed it twice. So I had that sitting. I had pollen actually sitting there. And so once I got that, I just touched that up, and created the HP21. And really, the HP21 stands for the year that I made it in. It was 2021. And funny enough, I met Eddie the grower. Well, he's the one that's credited with bringing the HP13 to the masses. Now, I thought that he was the original breeder, but I just saw him in last month in New York, and he came to the expo, and he came up to my booth. He bought a pack of seeds from me, and later in the day we went out and we started talking. And then I started talking to him about the HP13, and I was like, yeah, what did you do to breed the HP13? He said, I was not the breeder, but I like to consider myself the caretaker.
Mm-hmm.
So the story that he told me was that they had the mother strain in California, and then they had a tie in a land race hash plant. So I think they were growing a tie up there, and it wasn't finishing in time. So they went and got this landrace hash plant. They crossed the landrace hash plant into the into the tie, and then they took a male, and then they crossed that into the mother of the HP13, and I like to call it the Jane Doe. So I call it the Jane Doe Kush.
Yep.
So that's what I call it, and so that's the story that he tells me, and I guess that the story was that they made this cross. He wound up with a bunch of seeds, brought them back down to New York, popped them, found that number 13. That one became the HP13. He wound up getting busted. He lost all of his seeds, and he lost HP13. But when he was there, I wound up I gave him a pack of the Jane Doe back cross. So that was the Jane Doe times the Udub back cross 2. And then I back crossed that into the Jane Doe. So I was like, you'll find that HP13, in there. So he was like really psyched about that. So that was just last month. So
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, the number of classics you've had in your hands over the years of just backbones, you could almost call them, is freaking mind blowing.
Well, I
It's
mean,
pretty
that just
cool.
goes back on your experiences in knowing genetics,
Yep.
so, and then being able to source them. I've been fortunate enough that I've had a lot of people that have shared with me. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be who I am. So, a lot of, respect goes out to those people. But a lot of people come to me and they're like, hey, listen, I want you to have this. I want you to work this. I want you to preserve this. And I want you to do something, to make this, not, disappear, and to continue the genetics. And so, I mean, that's what I do. I love finding, to me, I'm more interested in an old NL, Purus Indica, some of the stuff that Todd McCormick's working with, Riot, the NL5 CSI, some of the NL5, NL5 stuff, the old stuff. I kind of geek out on that stuff a little bit more than kind of like your newest Oreo runts or whatever, the white truffles or whatever. That, like when you say that stuff to me, I have like really no interest in it whatsoever, because to me it's just like a reshuffling of different stuff that we already know what it is. You know what I mean? I'm looking for buried classic stuff, roadkill skunk, you know, a lot of the old NL, you know, a lot of the classic stuff, you know what I mean, the stuff that's the foundation of the strains that we have today. And really the remnants of what, and those are the remnants of what we have today.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I'm more excited about land races and like old stuff and hunting through stuff like that than I am on the modern era stuff. I just don't. I mean, I don't even really keep up with it. I don't really know what the newest hot thing is. I know Archive did that rainbow belt or whatever, but at least he put some effort into it. He actually did some breeding in some of that stuff, you know. But none of that stuff is really appealing to me. That nothing that I would really want to work with. But don't get me wrong, if someone offered me a cutting of it and be like, "Hey, you want this?" and I'm like, "All right, I'll just throw the sour diesel on and we'll see what happens," you know what I mean? But I'm not gonna go out of my way looking for it or being like, "Oh, I need to have this," or whatever. It's just
Yeah.
there's not anything out there that really sparks my interest.
Well, that's awesome, and that's why I'm a big fan and a big supporter. And I want to there's one more question I want to ask before your phone dies. But before we do that, please let people know where they can find you. Where can they find your work? Where can they find what you're up to? What are some good spots?
We are on Instagram, the Real Top Dog Seeds. You could find me also on Discord, Top Dog Seeds. You could always email me at topdogseeds at protonmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, JJ Edwards. If you just put in a search of Top Dog and Google Top Dog, and you'll just a
Yeah.
wide variety of things will come up. A lot of our distributors where you can find our seeds. You can buy seeds from me directly if you email me or go on my Discord. Yeah, and you know the information is just, you know, so widespread now that being able to hook up person to person, you weren't really able to do that back in the day. Now you can pretty much, you know, contact the breeder directly. Yeah, I have a small mail order business going on, and you get a free pack of seeds whatever you order.
Cool. And somebody in chat has already mentioned that ordering direct, you get the hookup. It's well worth it. So go and do it.
Right.
Go and do it. Man, and those two, Instagram and Discord, are down in the show notes below, everybody. So if you want a quick clickable link, just go into the show notes. Those will be down there, and you can find that. And okay, again, I really appreciate your time and staying late. Hopefully we've got battery for this last question. We're raising theirs.
I haven't gotten to 10% warning yet.
All
So
right, that's good. Okay, well, I wanted to get this one up here again. Dog Days Garden, big fan and big supporter of yours as well. He's running quite a few things, but he asks about his DNL and Mass Super Skunk work, and he asked again about the DNL. So maybe if you want to elaborate on that one, if you
well, the
could.
DNL originally came from the weasel. The original genetics were found at a show, a Grateful Dead show, I think in 1991 down at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. Him and a buddy bought a bag of kind bud and found 10 seeds. So he wound up growing some of them out. That became the skunk 1, 2, and 3. Another friend of his wanted to start growing. I think he started growing He gave him the skunk one, and he wound up giving him some seeds also. So he wound up making his own cross. I think he had it the Hawaiian. I think he had some Hawaiian. He had the Hawaiian seeds he had gotten from Sensi. I think he only had found males out of that, and so he crossed that into the skunk one or the NL. I'm not quite sure. I think it was Hawaiian NL, and then crossed into the skunk one, but I'm not exactly sure precisely on that. But I just know that those three are in him. So he used to call it he used to call it NL, and then like, yeah, that's not really real NL, and then it'd be like the DNL. So originally we thought that there was chem in it, but there wasn't. So we used to just call it like the NL, like DNL, and so it just kind of got like stuck to DNL. So so I use that cutting, and I just cross a few different things into it. We thought that might have been in the sour, but it's hard to say. There's a lot of different theories on that. I've been told a lot of different stories over the years, by the weasel, but a friend of mine pointed out that I don't think the weasel ever had the DNL in his room, so I don't know if it's really in there, if that really had it. It might have been a Super Skunk. It's just one thing that we'll never know. Like I said, like I've always been kind of stickler on history because I always saw weed and people would be like, yeah, well, what is this and what is that? And people wanted to know these details. So, I became a weed nerd myself, so I always wanted to know these details as well. So we never really got to the bottom, and I don't think we'll ever really know. There's other stories out there that may or may not be true. I can only say what I know and what I think may be the truth. I can't, stand by it, And then the Colorado Super Skunk, I ended up getting the Super Skunk, the Matt Super Skunk cutting. I got seeds from Duke Diamond. It was the basic skunk, which was I think it was Super Sativa Seed Club Skunk 1 times NL 5, and then times I think it was the Illuminati Stardog. So he gave me those seeds, and so I crossed that into the Super Skunk. And when I saw Duke Diamond I was at the park, one of the last Emerald Cups, he had samples of that basic skunk, and I remember smelling the jar, and I was just like, whoa, man, that shit's like, it wasn't spot on Matt Super Skunk, but it was like, I could smell it in there. It was like, I could smell it in there. It was just missing a little something. It was like, it was there.
It's a tease.
And it was pretty close. You just need to, if you pheno hunted a little more, you might have found the right one, and so, but he told me he was under restrictions on letting that go. Right. And so he had to, everything that he crossed it into was like 3-way before he released it. But he wound up giving me like 10 packs of that, and then he's like, if you look in there, you're gonna find them. So I just really I just used the mail and used it for that outcross. I wound up sending him a few packs back recently, since he's got out. I guess he had lost everything else. So he gave me 10 packs. There's no way I was going to go through all 10. So I wound up sending him like 2 or 3 packs back to him. So he's going to start working with that basic skunk, Stardog, and so maybe we might see something come out of them with him soon.
Nice, very nice. I like his work, and from like the breeder perspective, one thing I really enjoy is he gives a lot of details about the plants for people who buy the seed pack. So kind of like you, he knows what the plant's going to offer. He knows what the plants are going to do, and just from I don't know, maybe it's age or whatever. That's just so important. It seems like a basic thing. So I'm glad
Well,
that
it's
you do
all
it.
about experience. It's experience and passion because I love good weed, So
Yeah, yeah. Well, don't we all?
just trying to pass that on, my experiences, pass those experiences on to other people.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely enjoyed your sharing today. I know everybody listening has enjoyed your sharing today. The door is absolutely open. Anytime you want to come back, talk about
Yeah.
birds, talk about new strains, anything. Doors open for you, JJ.
Yeah, anytime, just let me know.
Cool. Cool. I
Come
will.
on anytime.
Cool. I will do that. Thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for being in chat. Thanks for enjoying. And we'll catch everybody next time. Party on.
Peace out, everyone.
1, 2,